Welcome back to another episode of Smooth Brain EDH, where we make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. We've got a really great game for you all this week. Let's go ahead and see what everyone brought to the table. First is Ethan on Sefris of the Hidden Ways. This is an Esper Reanimator deck, discarding creature cards to help trigger his commander's ability to hopefully bring back some of those nasty creatures from the graveyard. His opening hand is an island, command tower, silence clearing, land tax, Strionic Resonator, Plague Crafter, and Sarah's Emissary. Next is Cody on Koma, Cosmos Serpent. This is your typical Simic pile full of ramp to power out its beefy commander and efficient threats in order to take over the game. He starts the game with an island, a forest, Yavimaya Coast, Bark Channel Pathway, Rampant Growth, Worn Power Stone, and Gyre Engineer. Third is Shelby on Radha, Heart of Keld. This is a Gruul lands deck, ramping hard to play some massive creatures and beat opponents' faces in. He keeps a hand with 3 forests, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, Gruul Signet, Druid Class, and Guardian Project. Our last player of this game is Chandler on Zurzoth, Chaos Rider. This deck is built around drawing and discarding cards to create a massive army of devils through his commander. His hand has 2 mountains, Adventurous Fair, Dockside Extortionist, Runaway Steamkin, Blasphemous Act, and Chaos Wand. We're about to hop right into the game, but before that, go ahead and leave us a comment on who you hope will take home the victory of this game. While you're down there, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss any more content. Now, on to the gameplay.
It looks like Chandler wins the die roll, and he starts his turn off with a mountain and passes. Ethan plays Command Tower into land tax and passes. Cody plays a Yavimaya Coast and passes. Shelby plays an actual factual Yavimaya and passes back to Chandler. Chandler top decks an Ancient Tomb, which he plays for a turn 2 Zurzoth. He'll then pass the turn to Ethan. On Ethan's upkeep, land tax will trigger, and he'll find one of each of his basics to his hand. He'll then play his plains, tap for 2, and cast his Dimir Signet. He'll then move to his end step, realize he has 8 in hand, and discard one of his islands. Now on Cody's turn, he'll play an island, tap for 2, and cast a Rampant Growth. Because of Shelby's Yavimaya, he decides to just get another island. The turn is then passed to Shelby, who plays a forest as land for turn. He'll then tap for 2 and cast a Gruul Signet before passing. Now on Chandler's turn, he'll play a mountain as land for turn. He'll then tap Ancient Tomb, taking 2 damage, and cast Runaway Steamkin with 1 floating. He'll then tap his mountain to cast a Dockside Extortionist to get 3 treasures. Runaway Steamkin will also get a counter. He'll then immediately sacrifice all 3 of his treasures to cast Chaos Wand, one of my favorite cards. Chandler will then move to combat and swing Zurzoth at Ethan. They'll both draw a card and randomly discard, and Chandler will get a devil. When they both randomly discard, Ethan has to discard a Plague Crafter, and Chandler has Wildfire Devils. Damage will then go through, and Chandler will pass the turn. Ethan will then repeat his land tax trigger to get 3 basics to his hand. He will then play an island as land for turn, and tap for 3 to cast his commander, Sefris. He'll then move to his end step and clean up by discarding 2 basics and a Master of Death. This will trigger Sefris, and he'll venture into the Lost Mine. He'll scry 1 to the top, and then the turn is finally passed to Cody. Cody will start off with a forest as land for turn. He'll then tap for 3 to cast a Worn Power Stone, and then pass the turn to Shelby. Shelby will play another forest as land for turn, then tap out to cast his Guardian Project before passing to Chandler. Chandler will start his turn off by casting a Tormenting Voice, taking 2 to Ancient Tomb, and floating 1 mana. He'll discard Blasphemous Act to draw 2 cards, and Runaway Steamkin will get a counter. He'll then play an Inventor's Fair as land for turn, then tap for 2 mana to cast Arcane Signet. He'll then move to combat, swing his 1/1 Devil at Cody, and Zurzoth at Shelby. The 3 of them draw and randomly discard. Cody discards his Pathway, Shelby a Forest, and Chandler his beloved Torbran. Chandler will also get to make 2 more Devils, and after that he'll pass the turn to Ethan. On Ethan's upkeep, he will get the exact same 3 basics to his hand, and he'll also pay a life to get Master of Death back to his hand. Then play a Swamp as land for turn. He'll then tap for 2 to cast his Strionic Resonator. He then moves to his end step again, discards 2 more basics, and Master of Death yet again, and he'll venture again to make a treasure token. The turn is now Cody's, who unfortunately misses a land drop, but he will cast Incubation Druid and Gyre Engineer this turn. The turn will then be passed to Shelby, and Shelby will start off with his Druid class. He'll then play a forest, gain a life, then tap for 3 to cast his commander, Radha. When she enters, he'll draw a card. And after all this, he'll pass the turn to Chandler. And Chandler will start off with another mountain as land for turn. He'll then tap for 3 and cast Imperial Recruiter. This will get Steamkin its 3rd counter. He'll search his library for a creature, and he ultimately decides on Conspiracy Theorist. He'll then make 3 red mana with his Runaway Steamkin and cast the Conspiracy Theorist, which will give the Steamkin yet another counter. After this, Chandler will move to combat and swing 1 Devil at everyone. In response to the attack trigger, Ethan will cast a Thirst for Knowledge. He'll draw 3 and discard a Swamp and a Sarah's Emissary. Sefris will let Ethan venture again, and he'll make everyone lose a life and he will gain a life. Attack triggers resolves, and everyone will draw and randomly discard. Shelby will go first, and he will discard Chaos Warp. Ethan has to discard his Godless Shrine, Chandler his Chain Reaction, and Cody discards his Freed from the Reel, which if you didn't know, makes infinite mana with Gyre Engineer. After this resolves, Chandler will make 3 more Devils. Ethan decides to not block and takes the 1 damage, Cody blocks with his Incubation Druid, and Shelby with Radha. When Chandler's Devil dies, he just pings Ethan for 1. He'll then pass the turn to Ethan, and Ethan decides to decline his land tax. He'll play a Swamp as land for turn, tap for 3, and cast Champion of Wits. He'll draw 2 cards and discard 2. He'll discard a Midnight Pathlighter and a High Market. When this happens, he'll complete the dungeon and draw a card. After completing the dungeon, he'll get to return a creature card from his graveyard to the battlefield, and you better believe he activates Strionic Resonator to copy the ability. He targets Sarah's Emissary with the first one, and the Pathlighter with the second. Chandler decides to respond by casting Deflecting Swat. He decides to change one of the targets of Ethan's Reanimation ability from Sarah's Emissary to Plaguecrafter. When Plaguecrafter ETBs, Ethan will have it sacrifice itself, Shelby will sacrifice his Radha, Chandler a Devil, which will ping Ethan for 1, and Cody will sacrifice his Gyre Engineer. Ethan will then sacrifice his treasure and tap out to cast Lightning Greaves. He'll then equip the Greaves to the Pathlighter and then move to combat. He'll swing Sefris at Shelby and the Pathlighter at Cody. Since he attacked 2 different players, he gets to venture twice. He'll go back into the Lost Mine and scry 1. And then after that, he'll make another treasure token. He'll just pass the turn to Cody after that. And Cody will completely tap out and cast his commander, Koma the Cosmos Serpent. He'll then pass the turn to Shelby and make a Koma's Coil on his upkeep. Shelby will start his turn off by leveling up Druid class. And after he does that, he'll play a Mountain and a Forest as his 2 land drops turn and gain 2 life. He'll then cast a Rampant Growth to find a mountain to the battlefield and gain another life. He'll then cast a Burgeoning and then pass the turn. If you couldn't tell, Shelby is floating out pretty heavily. Chandler will stop Shelby on his end step though and activate his Chaos Wand, taking 2 to his Ancient Tomb. And after checking to see if Chaos Wand breaks timing restrictions, Chandler decides to target Shelby with it to try to get a ramp spell. But he flips into a Croson Grip. Chandler asks the board what they think he should hit, and both Shelby and Cody say the Strionic Resonator, so that's what he chooses. The turn is then officially passed to Chandler, and Chandler will play another Mountain as land for turn. After this, he'll tap for 4 to cast a Zariel, and he'll take 2 to his Ancient Tomb. And Runaway Steamkin will get a 3rd counter. He'll then tap for 4 again and cast a Hell Rider, and everybody's getting a little nervous now. He'll then uptick Zariel, and then move to combat. Chandler, knowing that Ethan is probably going to get his Emissary back from the graveyard next turn, decides to take a big chunk out of Ethan. He'll swing 1 Devil at Cody and Shelby, and 2 at Ethan. He'll then swing Hell Rider, Imperial Recruiter, Dockside Extortionist, and Runaway Steamkin at Ethan, and then Zurzoth at Shelby. Upon attacking, Ethan will take 6 damage from Hell Rider, Cody will take 1, and Shelby will take 2. Zurzoth's attack trigger will then resolve, and everybody will draw and randomly discard. Chandler only has 1 in hand, so he'll go ahead and randomly discard his Forgotten Cave. Shelby will discard a Harrow, Cody Esika's Chariot, and Ethan will discard an Arcane Sanctum. Ethan will then move to blocks and throw his Champion of Wits underneath the Steamkin, and then take 12 damage. Cody will just take the 2 damage, and Shelby will take 5 damage, 3 of which being Commander. When Ethan's Champion of Wits dies, he'll get to venture into the dungeon. He'll make everyone lose a life, and he'll gain a life. Chandler will then pass the turn to Ethan, and Ethan will start his turn off with a Morphic Pool. He'll then move straight to combat and swing Sefris at Shelby and the Pathlighter at Chandler. When they both connect, Ethan gets to venture twice. He'll complete the dungeon and return his Sarah's Emissary after drawing a card. And you best believe he chooses creatures when it enters. And when Ethan resolves his second venture trigger, he'll go back into the Lost Mine and scry 1 to the bottom. He'll then cast a Spark Double, copying Sarah's Emissary, and when it enters the battlefield, he thinks for a little bit about what he wants to name, and he ultimately decides Sorcery, because he's worried about damage board wipes from Chandler and Shelby. He'll then cast an Esper Sentinel, and then move his Lightning Greaves over to his Emissary that's giving him protection from creatures. Ethan will then pass the turn to Cody. Koma will then trigger on Cody's upkeep, but he'll respond to it by casting Mystic Reflection. He'll target Ethan's Spark Double, which is actually Sarah's Emissary. And Cody will pay 1 to Ethan's Esper Sentinel. Then, when the Koma's Coil comes in as a copy of the Emissary, Cody decides to also choose Creature. So now Ethan and Cody really can't touch each other. Cody will then move to combat and swing Koma at Shelby. The turn is then passed to Shelby, and he'll start off with a tap Stomping Ground and a Mountain as his 2 lands for turn, and he'll gain 2 life from this. He'll then tap for 3 to cast a Commander Sphere. He'll tap it for a red and then sacrifice it to draw a card. He'll then cast a Mina and Din, and draw a card when they enter the battlefield. After this, he'll play a Fabled Passage, gaining a life, sacrificing it to find a forest to the battlefield, and getting yet another life. Then, after cleaning up his lands a bit, he passes the turn to Chandler. Moves straight to combat, he'll swing 1 Devil at each of them, and then Conspiracy Theorist at Shelby. Upon attacking, Zurzoth and Conspiracy Theorist will trigger. Chandler will resolve Zurzoth's first, so everybody will draw and discard at random. Chandler will randomly discard Shatter Skull Smashing, which he decides to exile with Conspiracy Theorist. Ethan will discard a Swamp, Shelby a Mountain, and Cody Glittering Frost. Chandler then pays 1 to Conspiracy Theorist to discard a Bag of Holding, exiling it, and then he'll draw a card. Moving on to damage, Ethan and Cody aren't going to take anything. Shelby will take 2 from Hellrider, 2 from Conspiracy Theorist, and then 1 from a 1/1 Devil. Shelby decides to not block Conspiracy Theorist because it could potentially help Chandler find an answer to deal with these emissaries. Chandler will also get 3 more Devils, and then uptick Zariel. Chandler will then pay 4 mana, 3 of which will come from Runaway Steamkin, and activate Chaos Wand, targeting Ethan. Ethan flips nearly half of his deck, and finally flips into a Victimize. Chandler will gladly sacrifice a Devil to get 2 creature cards from his graveyard back to the battlefield. And he doesn't pay 1 to Esper Sentinel. He'll bring back Torbrand and Wildfire Devils. And when he sacrifices the Devil, he doesn't want to deal any more damage to Shelby, so he just hits Mina and Den. Chandler and Shelby then begin to conspire amongst themselves. When Wildfire Devils hits the battlefield, Chandler rolls, and luckily hits Shelby. Shelby gladly chooses his Chaos Warp, and Chandler will have it warp away Ethan's Emissary that's giving protection from sorceries. When Chandler casts it, Steamkin will get a counter, and Ethan will respond by casting Frantic Search. He'll draw 2, discard 2, and untap 3 lands. Ethan will discard a land and Consecrated Sphinx. Chaos Warp will then resolve. Ethan will also venture again and make another treasure token. After the emissary is warped away, Ethan shuffles, Chandler cuts, and Ethan flips over a D-Spark. D-Spark will stay on the top of his library, and Chandler will float 6 mana, taking 2 to Ancient Tomb. He'll cast his Shatter Skull Smashing from exile, where X is equal to 4. He'll deal 3 damage to Ethan's commander, and 1 to Esper Sentinel, and unfortunately he misses a Steamkin trigger. Chandler will then pass the turn, and Ethan will flash in a Cathar Commando. Ethan will then play a Sea of Clouds, and Shelby will put in a Firelit Thicket to Burgeoning and gain a life. Ethan then taps for 5 mana to recast Sefris. Chandler is worried that with Sefris out, Ethan's going to be able to get back his Consecrated Sphinx this turn and take control of this game with all that card advantage. And while Cody isn't able to interact with Ethan's graveyard, he does decide to disallow Sefris because Ethan can easily complete a dungeon this turn, and drawing 2 cards on everyone's draw step and 6 when Chandler gets 3 Zurzoth triggers is crazy. Ethan will then just move to combat and swing for 7 at Chandler. When it connects, Ethan will venture into the dungeon, gain a life, and make everyone lose a life. Ethan will then pass the turn to Cody, and Cody will make another Koma's Coil with Summoning Sickness on his upkeep. The first thing he'll do on his turn is cast a Mind Stone, which he will immediately sacrifice to draw a card. He'll then play a Forest's Land for turn, and then tap for 4 and cast Sakashima's Will, targeting Ethan. Cody only chooses 1 mode, and he wants one of Ethan's creatures. Ethan doesn't want to get rid of his creature protection, or his creature that lets him venture more, so he gives him the Crusader. And Cody immediately pays 1 to sacrifice it and destroy Ethan's Lightning Greaves. After this, Cody will move straight to combat, and since all of his creatures can't be blocked, he decides to full swing all of his Koma's Coils at Chandler. This will be 18 damage at Chandler, enough to kill him. Ethan makes it clear to Chandler that he can help him in this situation, but wants to know what's in it for him. Chandler simply replies, "I'll kill Cody next turn." And that's more than enough for Ethan to tap for 2 and de-spark Cody's Emissary. Cody's unfortunately tapped out and has no responses, so his protection from creatures is gone. Chandler gladly puts 6 of his 1/1 Devils underneath the Koma's Coils. And unfortunately, Cody forgets that Torbrand is on the field, so when he lets damage go through, his 6 Koma's Coils will die, and Chandler will point 18 damage at his face. Unfortunately, Cody has nothing left to do, so he'll just pass the turn to Shelby. And Shelby will start off by recasting Radha, and he'll draw a card when she enters the battlefield. Shelby will then play a mountain and gain a life. After this, he will level up his Druid class to make one of his lands an 11/11. Shelby decides not to attack with the land, and then just passes the turn to Chandler. On Chandler's upkeep, he'll roll for Wildfire Devils, and Cody is the chosen player. Cody, hoping he can coax Chandler out of killing him this turn, decides to give him Sakashima Will. And Chandler casts it, targeting Ethan, wanting to get Ethan's Pathlighter, so Chandler can Venture Summon this turn after hitting everybody. And of course, Ethan does choose the Pathlighter, opposed to a thing giving him protection from Chandler's entire board. Chandler does not intend on breaking he and Ethan's deal this turn. In fact, he plans on killing both Shelby and Cody. But before that, he wants to see what he can get off his Chaos Wand. He activates it, taking 2 to Ancient Tomb, targeting Ethan. And the top card of his library is a Path to Exile, which Chandler will gladly cast to exile Ethan's Emissary. This is essentially game. With the combination of Torbrand and Hellrider, every time Chandler attacks with a creature, his opponent gets lightning bolted. Ethan and Cody are certainly dead no matter what happens here. And Shelby can see the top card of his library thanks to Radha, and he's ready to concede himself as well. But before everybody does concede, Cody decides to meme a little, sacrifices all of his Koma's coils, and taps down Shelby's board. And for the sake of the video, Chandler full swings at everybody before they concedes. Ah, but if it isn't insult to injury, Chandler reveals all 5 pieces of Exodia, winning the game instantly. So yeah, everybody concedes, and today Chandler wins with Zurzoth. Well guys, what'd you think? I really can't believe how many good things Chandler got off that Chaos Wand, especially there at the end. It literally let him win the game. And let's also not forget how many copies of Sarah's Emissary there were. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Check out the deck lists in the description, along with our links to our social media pages. As always, you guys, have a smooth day.